The sea gives, and the sea takes. In the small maritime town of Greyhoor, this was an undeniable truth as constant as the tides. But for Eli Wells, the ocean was no longer a provider or a partner. It was a thief. It had stolen everything. 8 months. 8 agonizing months since he'd last seen the bright, loving face of his wife, Hannah, and the gap-toothed, joyful smile of his 9-year-old daughter, Sophie. He stood on the creaking wooden dock, where he'd hugged them goodbye. The salty air that once felt like home, now a constant, painful reminder of their final moments. Sophie had bounced with excitement, her little blonde braids swinging as she brandished the child-sized fishing rod he'd given her for her birthday. "You sure you can't come, Daddy?" she'd pouted, her blue eyes wide. "I promised Mr. Carson I'd help with his boat today, sweetheart," he'd said, ruffling her hair. "But Mom will show you that spot where she caught that monster bass." Hannah had smiled at him, that confident, capable smile he loved. "Don't worry, we'll bring back dinner. Be back before the storm hits," he'd called out as their small boat, the Sophie C, chugged away from the marina. The weather report had mentioned afternoon showers. Nothing serious. But the storm that had rolled in wasn't just a shower, it was a monster. A sudden, violent tempest that materialized out of nowhere, churning the sea into a furious, gray maelstrom. The search had been exhaustive. The Coast Guard, local fishermen, and volunteers had scoured the churning waters for weeks. But all they found was debris. Pieces of the Sophie C washed ashore, along with Hannah's waterproof backpack and Sophie's little fishing hat, a cartoon fish stitched on the front. The official conclusion was swift and brutal, lost at sea. But Eli refused to accept it. He clung to a sliver of hope, a desperate belief that Hannah, an experienced sailor, could have found a way. He'd spent his weekend searching the chain of small, uninhabited islands, dotting the coastline, diving until his lungs burned, calling their names until his voice was raw. The townspeople watched with pity. They whispered that he was in denial, that he needed to let go. But how could he move on without knowing? This morning was no different. Eli was loading his dive gear onto his boat when his phone rang, flashing Greyhoor Police. His heart seized in his chest. "Mr. Wells, this is Officer Reynolds. We need you to come to the station. There's been a development." "A development?" The words echoed in his mind, a terrifying mix of hope and dread. "A local fisherman came in," Reynolds continued. "He believes he may have seen something. It's better if we discuss this in person." The drive to the station was a blur. Eli's hands trembled on the steering wheel. This could be it. The breakthrough he'd been praying for. Or it could be another false lead. Another cruel twist of the knife. In a small meeting room, a weathered fisherman sat nervously. "Mr. Wells, this is Tomas Herrera," Officer Reynolds said. Tomas stood, his hand rough and calloused in Eli's. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "What did you see?" Eli asked, his voice tight. "I was out early this morning," Thomas began, his gaze fixed on the table, "ferrying supplies to the Marine Research Station on Wolf Island. On my way back, I cut across the old shipping lane near the decommissioned Wolf Rock Lighthouse. Saves about 40 minutes. He paused. It was foggy. Visibility was poor. But as I passed the lighthouse, I thought I saw a little girl standing on the dock, waving at me." Eli's heart hammered against his ribs. "A girl? How old? Young, maybe 8 or 9? It was hard to tell in the fog. But something about her... It wasn't until I got back and saw one of your missing person flyers. Mr. Wells, she looked like your daughter," Officer Reynolds interjected. Mr. Herrera wasn't completely certain. The lighthouse is about 10 miles offshore of Wolf Island. There are stories about it. "Stories?" Eli asked. "Local superstition," Thomas said quickly. Some say it's haunted. That's partly why I didn't stop. The fog was thick. I figured if there really was a child, there must be an adult. The lighthouse keeper's daughter, maybe. The lighthouse isn't operational, Reynolds clarified, consulting his notes. It was decommissioned years ago, sold to a private owner, a man named Malcolm Vire. He reached for the phone. We have a number, but it may be outdated. He dialed, then frowned. Disconnected. We need to go out there, Eli said, standing abruptly. If there is any chance at all. I can lead a boat out, Tomas offered. The weather's clear now. Within the hour, Eli was on a police patrol boat, speeding across the waves with Thomas and 2 officers. The Wolf Rock lighthouse grew from a speck on the horizon into a stark gray column, a lonely sentinel rising from a bed of jagged rocks. As they drew closer, a jolt went through Eli. Pulled up on the rocks near the small dock was a destroyed wooden boat, its hull battered and broken. That wasn't there last time I passed by, Thomas murmured. Officer Carter, the senior officer, skillfully brought their boat alongside the concrete dock. Everyone, stay alert. They stepped onto the weathered platform. Carter knocked firmly on the heavy metal door. Police! Is anyone inside? Only the cry of gulls answered. The door was locked. As they stood wondering what to do next, the sound of another boat engine grew louder. A modern motorboat approached. A man with a shock of white hair at the helm. He studied them with surprise as he docked. Can I help you, gentlemen? He called out, his voice steady but wary. Coastal Police, Carter said, holding up his badge. Are you Malcolm Vire? The man's eyebrows rose. I am. This is my property. We received a report of a child seen at this lighthouse this morning, Carter explained. A strange, almost imperceptible shift crossed Malcolm's face. He gave a short, dry laugh. A child? Well, that explains the visitors. I was here this morning with my niece. We were collecting some old belongings. Eli's fleeting hope began to crumble. Your niece? Carter asked. Would you mind showing us a photo? Malcolm bristled. What for? I don't appreciate the implication. Just procedure, sir, Carter said smoothly. With a sigh of theatrical reluctance, Malcolm pulled out his phone. He swiped through it and briefly flashed a picture of a young girl with short blonde hair. Satisfied? Carter turned to Thomas. Could this be the girl you saw? Thomas hesitated, studying Malcolm. It could be, he said slowly. She looked similar. Like I said, it was foggy. A little girl in a red jacket. Eli stepped forward, his voice strained. You said she looked like my daughter. I wasn't sure what I saw, Tomas said, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Vire, Carter said, since we're here, would you mind if we have a look inside? Malcolm's jaw tightened, but he pulled a set of keys from his pocket. Fine, but it's just dusty storage. The heavy door creaked open, revealing a sparse, damp interior. A spiral staircase led up to the lantern room, and another door led down to a storm cellar. What's down there? Carter asked. Storage, Malcolm replied curtly. Old equipment, personal items. Mind if we take a look? Malcolm's hands began to tremble, a detail Eli did not miss. If you insist, unlock the cellar door. The space was cramped and crowded with boxes and furniture covered in tarps. Eli's eyes narrowed. Malcolm deliberately positioned himself in front of an old wooden cabinet against the far wall, blocking it from view. What's in the cabinet? Eli asked. Personal belongings, Malcolm said dismissively. Family mementos. As Carter surveyed the room, finding nothing overtly suspicious, Eli's gaze was drawn to the corner. Partially hidden by a tarp were 2 fishing rods, one adult-sized, one child-sized. The color, the design of the reel. His heart lurched. and through a crack in the cabinet door, he saw it. A pale-colored hat. "Gentlemen, if you're finished," Malcolm said loudly. As they filed out, Eli hung back. "Those fishing rods," he said, his voice low and tight. "They look exactly like the ones my wife and daughter had." Malcolm's face hardened. "They're mine and my late daughter's." "May we see them?" Carter asked. "I would prefer you didn't," Malcolm said flatly. "They are cherished possessions." "And the hat I saw in the cabinet," Eli pressed. "It looks just like my wife's." A flicker of fear crossed Malcolm's face. "Wait here," he snapped. He disappeared into the cellar, returning moments later with the hat. "I found this washed ashore months ago. If it's your wife's, take it." Eli took the hat with trembling hands. It was Hannah's. The subtle stitching she'd added herself was unmistakable. Back outside, Malcolm locked the door. "I trust that concludes your investigation." "For now," Carter said. "We'll need a current address, Mr. Vire." Malcolm pointed vaguely towards the horizon. "I live on Wolf Island, on the northern shore." His tone was clipped, impatient. With that, he boarded his boat and sped away, not towards Wolf Island, but back towards the mainland. "That man is hiding something," Eli said quietly as they boarded the patrol boat. On the journey back, Eli clutched Hannah's hat, the fishing rods. Hannah's was a Mariner Pro X6 with a special chrome reel. Not a common model. The police took the hat for evidence, promising to return it. As they docked, Eli turned to Thomas. "What do you really think?" Thomas hesitated. There was something off about him, but when I saw the girl this morning, her hair was short, just like the girl in that photo. Your daughter had long braids. Eli's heart skipped a beat. Sophie always wore her hair in braids. Hannah would never let her cut it. "But what I find really strange," Thomas continued, "is his claim he lives on Wolf Island. I've been sailing there twice a week for 15 years. I've never seen him or a child there. Never heard a single researcher mention them." He lied. A cold dread washed over Eli. Malcolm Vire had lied about everything. Eli couldn't go home. He found himself at the Silver Anchor, Greyhore's oldest tavern, a place where fishermen's gossip flowed as freely as the beer. He asked the bartender, Doug, about Malcolm Vire. "Vire?" Doug's eyebrows shot up. "Odd fellow, haven't heard that name in a while. Bought that lighthouse years ago. Some say he's not right in the head. Spends all his time alone out there. Though I heard he was building something on Sealbone Island recently." "Sealbone?" Eli straightened. "He told the police he lives on Wolf Island." Doug scoffed. "Wolf? Nah. The marine research folks would have mentioned it. Last I heard, he had some kind of boathouse set up in the inlet channels off the main harbor. Hidden away." Eli's mind raced. He thanked Doug and immediately called Thomas. "I need your help again. Meet me at the marina." He explained what he had learned. "I want to find that boathouse," Eli said, a desperate urgency in his voice. "That's a maze back there," Thomas warned, but seeing the look in Eli's eyes, he nodded. "All right. My boat's better for those shallow channels. Let's go." They navigated the twisting, overgrown waterways, a world away from the bustling harbor. Tall reeds and mangroves crowded the banks. After nearly 20 minutes, Thomas cut the engine. "Look there." Tucked into a jagged, hidden nook was a bizarre structure. An old 40-foot longboat with a weathered cabin built on its deck, moored to a crude dock. Above it, nestled in the rocks and trees, stood a small, ramshackle cabin. "That has to be it," Eli breathed. They watched from a concealed position. Soon, Malcolm Vire emerged from the cabin. He descended to the boathouse, then returned to the cabin. When he came out again, Eli's breath caught in his throat. Malcolm was carrying a small figure over his shoulder, a child with blonde hair. "Oh my God!" Eli gasped, grabbing the binoculars Thomas offered. "He's carrying a child." The figure was limp, unmoving. "She looks unconscious." His hands shaking, Eli dialed 911. "I'm in the inlet channels off Greyhor Harbor," he said, his voice a strained whisper. "I think Malcolm Vire has abducted a child, possibly my daughter." While on the line with the dispatcher, he watched in horror as Malcolm made another trip down from the cabin. This time, he was struggling with a heavy sack. He lost his footing, and the sack tumbled down the rocky incline. From the open end, a woman's head was partially visible, blonde hair spilling onto the ground. "There's a woman," Eli choked out to the dispatcher. "In a sack. I think she's—" He couldn't finish. Malcolm scrambled to retrieve the sack and hauled it into the boathouse. He was preparing to leave. "He's getting ready to go," Eli urged the dispatcher. "Units are en route," the dispatcher said. "Do not approach the suspect. He may be armed." Suddenly, a twig snapped under Thomas's foot. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence. Malcolm's head snapped up. He peered in their direction, then pulled a handgun from his jacket. "I know you're there!" His voice boomed across the water. "Show yourselves!" A shot rang out, the bullet kicking up water just yards from their boat. "Come out!" Malcolm screamed. Just then, the blessed sound of approaching sirens and a helicopter filled the air. Multiple police boats swarmed the mouth of the channel, their lights flashing. "Malcolm Vire!" an amplified voice commanded. "This is the Coastal Police! Drop your weapon!" For a moment, Malcolm stood frozen in the helicopter's spotlight, a cornered animal. Then, with deliberate slowness, he dropped the gun. As officers swarmed the dock and cuffed him, his eyes found Eli's in the distance. A look of pure, chilling hatred crossed his face. And then, inexplicably, he began to laugh. A hollow, terrifying sound that echoed across the water. Medics rushed into the boathouse. Moments later, one emerged, carefully carrying a small figure wrapped in an emergency blanket. Eli saw the blonde hair, the pale face. "Sophie!" he cried, surging forward, only to be held back by an officer. "Sir, please let them work." It was her. It was his daughter. She was alive. Then came the grim procession. Officers carefully carried a body bag from the boathouse. Eli didn't need to ask. He knew, with a certainty that shattered his soul, that Hannah was inside. An officer approached him, his face grim. "Mr. Wells, I'm sorry. What we found inside, it's deeply disturbing." He unzipped the bag just enough for Eli to see. The sight was an unimaginable nightmare. It wasn't just that Hannah was gone. Malcolm had started to take her apart. Her body was mutilated, altered beyond recognition. A raw, guttural sound of pure agony tore from Eli's throat as rage and grief consumed him. He dropped to his knees, the world dissolving into a vortex of pain. Before he could process the horror, officers emerged carrying the two large cooler boxes and the fishing toolbox he'd seen at the lighthouse. What was inside them? What could possibly be worse? At the station, Detective Rivera laid out the sickening truth. "Mr. Wells," she began, her voice gentle but firm, "the cooler boxes contained preserved human remains. Body parts from what appear to be multiple victims, stored in glass jars, meticulously labeled with names and dates." Eli felt the room spin. "The fishing toolbox. It held his instruments. Your wife." He was interrupted before he could finish. She explained that they had found Malcolm's journals. He was a former maritime engineer whose wife and daughter had died in a ferry accident he'd helped design. The guilt had driven him mad. He wasn't replacing his family. In his twisted mind, he was saving other mother-daughter pairs from the chaos of the world, preserving what he called the perfect maternal bond. He kept trophies, Eli whispered, horrified. He called them tributes, Rivera corrected. Resin crystals containing fabric, personal items, and hair. We found one with what appears to be your daughter's braids. According to his journal, Hannah and Sophie's boat had been sinking when they drifted near the lighthouse. He'd rescued them, only to hold them captive. He was planning to move his entire horrific operation to the more isolated Sealbone Island. This morning, he had returned to the lighthouse for his final things. Sophie, partially sedated, had managed to get to the dock where Thomas saw her. When Malcolm realized she'd been spotted, he killed Hannah. She had become a liability. She had been alive all these months. So close. The drive to the hospital was a haze of grief and disbelief. Sophie was alive, but Hannah was gone, lost to a monster's madness. In a quiet hospital room, Eli saw her. She lay in a bed that seemed too large for her small frame, her hair cut short and ragged. She was pale and thin, but she was breathing. She was alive. He took her small, cold hand in his. Hours passed. As twilight fell, her eyelids fluttered open. Her gaze was unfocused. Then it found him. "Daddy?" she whispered, her voice frail, as if he were a dream. "Yes, sweetheart," Eli choked out, tears streaming down his face. "It's me. I'm here. You're safe now." Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed by a wave of anguish. "Mommy," she sobbed, her face crumpling. "The bad man, he took Mommy away." Eli gathered her gently into his arms. "I know, baby. I know." "She told me to be brave," Sophie whispered through her tears. "She said you would find us, and you did." "I never stopped looking for you," Eli promised, his voice thick with emotion. "Not for one single day." "I want Mommy to come back," she cried. He held her tighter, his own grief a crushing weight. "Mommy can't come back, sweetheart. But she loved you so much. She was so brave, and she protected you until I could find you." They clung to each other, father and daughter, reunited in an ocean of sorrow. The road ahead would be long and shadowed by trauma. But as the first rays of morning sun streamed through the hospital window, a fragile new hope took root. Not for the life they had lost, but for the one they would now build together, forever honoring the memory of the woman whose incredible courage had made it possible.